Janelle, we can't hear you.
Sorry, just trying to work out how to unmute myself. So I'll give you a quick update on what's going on with one of the surveys that we have underway at the moment. This is the Cloncurry Extension Survey up in northwest Queensland. So I thought I'd start by telling people what an MT survey is, just in case people aren't aware. When I say MT, I'm talking about magnetotelluric data. Probably one of the big selling points of MT data is it's one of the only techniques that can provide information not only about the whole crust, but also the underlying mantle. So it's quite an exciting technique. It tells us about the subsurface resistivity or conductivity. And in contrast to a lot of other electrical techniques, it's actually a passive one. So we don't have any active source on the ground. We're just relying on natural variations in the Earth's electric and magnetic fields. And that's what we measure. So this is actually how we set up the equipment in the field. We've got 2 or 3 magnetometers and some electrodes that we leave out recording for a period of time. So if we want to see shallow things, we can leave these out for a couple of hours. If we want to see deep into the crust, we need to leave them out for days or even weeks. And just a quick note for anyone not familiar with the electrical space, it might be a bit disconcerting. I will use high conductivity and low resistivity interchangeably. They mean the same thing. I will try not to be too confusing. So if we think about what we can achieve with MT, I want to think about firstly the shallow crustal area. It's because it's a lot simpler. Essentially, there's only really 2 controls on what will generate a magnetotelluric anomaly in the shallow crust. And those are the composition of the rocks that are underneath us and the presence or absence of any fluids. So these fluids could be groundwater, they could be saltwater incursions if we're near the coast, they could be geothermal fluids if we're not in Australia, or even melt. So these things will all produce an MT anomaly, but primarily what we're interested in is the compositional variations that are generating MT anomalies. So this is a bit of a summary of how resistivity varies between different rock types and other bits and pieces in the earth. So you can see that massive sulfides are significantly more conductive than general rocks that exist in the crust. So this is why we use MT in an exploration sense. Well, I think one of the strongest selling points of MT data is the depth penetration, as I've already mentioned. If you look at other techniques like airborne EM or even ground-based EM or hybrid systems, in Australia, you're probably only going to see down to 500 metres unless you're lucky. Odds are you'll be unable to see that far. You'll actually only be able to see the top couple 100 metres. So MT will actually overcome this limitation. The longer you leave the equipment out, the deeper you'll be able to see. So the survey that we're running is up to the north of Cloncurry. It's actually these green sites here, directly north and a little bit west of Cloncurry. We're planning on collecting 522 sites with a station spacing of 2 kilometres, and it's directly adjacent to the survey that we ran with similar specs in 2016. So that's this guy down here, just to the northeast of Cloncurry. We're planning to acquire data between the frequency range of 0.001 seconds and 500 seconds for anyone who understands acquisition bandwidths. And so the background that I've got behind this image is actually the regional conductivity structure. So we're in quite an interesting anomalous area in Australia and even in Queensland. And so I'll come back to this at the end of the talk. So one of the primary motivations for the survey was actually the results of the 2016 survey in the area. This is a conductivity slice out of a model from that data. So we've got conductive things in red down the eastern side of the survey. We've got a quite large conductive structure and then a couple of more isolated conductive features within the survey area. So some people may be aware, but this one in the south here is actually spatially associated with the Ernest Henry deposit. But there's this interesting thing going on up here just outside the array of the data. It's based on 1 or 2 sites. We're not quite sure if it's real or an artifact. And so this was one of the primary motivations for actually extending the survey up to the northwest. In addition, the survey should let us see through the conductive overburden that's in this area. So the entire survey area is actually under cover with the boundary of outcrop indicated here in black. And because the full array of data at the end of this second part of the survey will be a larger array, so we're actually about 100 kilometres north-south and 50 kilometres east-west, we'll be actually able to see deeper into the crust in a more meaningful way. So it's quite a number of different reasons why we're doing this survey. This is a different look at the data from 2016, from not the data, sorry, from the inversion model from 2016. So there's this big sheet-like conductor down the eastern side of the survey, which continues down to at least 20 kilometres depth. And then these pipe-like bodies that sit, that come out of that deep conductor and up into the near surface. So these are the sorts of things that we're quite interested in. So where we're at with the survey, we're about 40% complete. It's actually being acquired right now. So these white sites have all been acquired, and I'll show you some preliminary plots. I don't think I can emphasize how strongly this is only preliminary data. Please don't drill anything that I'm showing you and then say, why is it not there? It's only preliminary. We've got more QA, QC to undertake on this data before it's finished. What I'll show you is some phase tensor plots. I think this is the best way to look at data. So if you want to have an inversion model, that's a model, but this is actually looking at what the data tells you without modeling anything. So a phase tensor plot of MT data is a bit complicated, but essentially you've got 2 elements. You've got some ellipses and some arrows. So here's a little slither of data. Each of these circles is an individual MT site at a specific depth, and the ellipses will tell you how the shape of these ellipses will tell you how complex the structure underneath you is, and the color will tell you something about the conductivity or resistivity of your underlying rocks. The arrows are a bit easier again. The arrows are simply going to tell you which way you should go laterally to find a large conductor. So they'll point towards a conductivity feature, and the larger the arrow, the stronger the conductor. So in the top panel, these ellipses are all pretty circular. So that means you've got probably a one-dimensional structure underneath you, like a basin. And then you've got red ones indicating it's more conductive. Blue ones are more resistive, and the arrows are real little. So there's no significant lateral changes in resistivity. And then this bottom example, you've got a number of squashed ellipses and quite large arrows. And if you look at them closely, you can see these arrows are actually pointing in opposite directions at adjacent sites in this area. And that means that somewhere in here, you've got something quite conductive. So that's broadly what these plots are going to tell you. So this is a plot of the very shallowest part of the new survey data. We've got, what I've done is I've essentially made a series of plots at different periods, getting deeper and deeper into the earth. So this one here is one of the highest frequencies we have, and it tells you about what's going on about 100 meters down. And then as I step through these slices, it'll show you what's going on until all the way down past 200 kilometers. So up in the north of this area, you can see a lot of circular red ellipses. These are actually seeing the cover rocks in the area. This is, I think, Carpentaria Basin. So it's quite conductive basin features up here. And then as I step down through, you can see that the circular ellipses actually recede to the north, where the basin's a bit deeper. And in the southern corner, you've got a lot of quite complex arrows and ellipses that are in reasonably random orientations, but maybe there's little patches that are similar to each other. So these are actually seeing the basement rocks that underlie the basins. And if I keep stepping through them, you can see the basins recede, as I say, and then by about this point, every site in the survey area is seeing down into the basement about structures that are going on down there. And you've got some pretty complex structures. And then if I keep stepping through, I'm at 0.5 seconds. And then if I step down to 1 second, I want you to keep your eye on this area in green. This is 1 second. It's about the same as 1 to 2 kilometers depth. So that's where we're at in the Earth. And then if I keep stepping through, you can see there's actually something very interesting going on up there in the data. So we've got a really strong reversal of arrows that starts at about a kilometer down and continues on throughout most of the shallow to deep crust. So this is indicating that there's a really strong conductive feature up there that's quite stationary laterally and has quite a significant depth extent, and it's actually adjacent to the Quamby Fault. It's not on the Quamby Fault, but it's adjacent. And then you can see that most of the sites in the rest of the survey area are pretty consistent and pointing off to the northeast in a way that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And as we go deeper again, all of the sites end up pointing off to the northeast. And we even lose that strong conductive structure in the north of the survey. So what's going on here is as we go deeper into the Earth, all of these sites are actually seeing this really enormous conductive feature called the Carpentaria conductivity anomaly, which is imaged in the AusLAMP data. So if I let this play through, I've just made a little GIF to show you stepping down through the Earth, how these base tensors look. So you can see the deepening basin structures to the north, and then the basement underlying it, and then the very deep conductive features of the Carpentaria conductivity anomaly. So from here, we obviously have to finish the acquisition. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the north of the survey area, and that's where our acquisition is happening at the moment. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming, hopefully. It'll take a couple of months to finalise this acquisition, and then we'll QA/QC the data and release it 6 to 8 weeks after acquisition is complete. And then after we've released the data, we'll probably start up a modelling project after that. So that's it.
Thanks, Janelle. Now you've had a couple of questions whilst you've been talking, so stand by. Rich Scott would like a copy of, wanted to know if we could make available a copy of the slides, particularly the one that gives depth resistivity rock type overview in general. He thought that was fantastic. We've said that we will be making a copy of the webinar available online afterwards, but we can also send, Richard, we can send you that, I'm sure. And if you've got Janelle's contact details, otherwise we can make that available too. And then another question from Anusha, production rate and survey cost per line kilometre.
So the production rate entirely depends on how many sets of equipment your crews have. So we have a crew out there with 5 sets of equipment. It's just 2 guys and some equipment. We record at these sites for 24 hours. So we record probably a lot longer than some industry sites would. So essentially we get probably somewhere between 5 and 7 sites a day. And the cost is obviously dependent on the size of your survey. So it's difficult to say how much it's going to cost you unless you scope out a whole survey.
Anusha has a couple of other questions, Janelle. In your view, how can you promote MT as a key exploration tool for explorers and mining companies?
I don't think it's a key tool. I think it's another tool. If you've got a question that can be answered by MT, use MT. If you don't use MT. It's just a tool.
And do you incorporate MT and seismic in your inversions?
I don't. I generally will run the MT inversion separately and then compare it to the seismic data, but there are codes that will allow you to do both.
All right, and then Tobias has a question: how would large amounts of pyrite in the rocks affect the MT survey, if at all?
So it depends entirely on how interconnected your pyrite is. So if you think about what's going to generate an MT anomaly, you're looking for interconnected conductive things that will allow a big enough current to be generated to measure. So if you've got disseminated pyrite, it's not going to give you very much. If you've got it in sheets along faults or controlled by other linear or planar features, you're probably more likely to get an MT anomaly.
And Mark Whittle is asking, how long are these stations in place to get this depth penetration?
So it's at the moment we're keeping them out for a minimum of, no, that's not true, 24 hours is what we keep these guys out for, if possible. It's really difficult to get the long period data at the moment because there's not a lot of sunspot activity around. If I had been collecting this survey maybe 3-4 years ago, we could have got the same amount of data with only a 16 or an 18-hour report. So it does depend a little bit on the sun, which sounds like a crazy thing to say, but at the moment 24 hours gets you this sort of depth.
And David McGuinness would like to know, all the deeper vectors pointed to the northeast, is that the influence of the Gulf?
No. But it could be, right? So if you were seeing that in the shallower data, it would definitely be something to consider. But we're a couple hundred k's away from the Gulf, and at 400 seconds, you're looking quite deeply into the Earth, and we know there's a big conductor up there. So that's the cause of all those arrows pointing that way, not the Gulf.
All right, well done, Janelle.